This video is sponsored by Taskade, a real-time organization and collaboration platform. Make sure to check the description for a discount on your subscription. Hey everyone, my name is Vishwas and welcome to this crash course on JavaScript for complete beginners. In this crash course, we will understand the fundamental concepts in JavaScript. Before we begin, let me go over a few points. First, I would like to mention this course is for complete beginners. I'm going to assume you have no prior knowledge of JavaScript and teach the course. If you're someone who is already familiar with JavaScript fundamentals, I would suggest you wait for the advanced JavaScript crash course. You do, however, have to be familiar with HTML and CSS. I've created crash courses on both the topics, so make sure you watch them before proceeding. Second, we are going to cover most of the fundamental concepts that you as a beginner should know. It is a crash course and not an exhaustive course on every single JavaScript topic. Having said that, this course is probably all you need as a beginner. Over the next few days, I will be publishing separate videos on advanced and asynchronous JavaScript topics. So make sure you stay tuned for that. Third, this video, unlike other videos in my channel, is a crash course and is longer in length. That doesn't mean you have to sit through the entire video at once. Take it easy, pause when necessary, and most importantly, make sure you code along with me, as that is the best way to learn. By the end of this video, you will have a solid understanding of the fundamentals of JavaScript. Alright, with these points in mind, let's get started. First, let us understand what is JavaScript. JavaScript is a high-level, often just-in-time compiled programming language that conforms to the ECMAScript specification. Now that's a lot to take in, so let me break it down in simple terms. High level means it is a more friendlier language to write code with. Just-in-time compiled means the code we write is compiled during execution rather than before execution. ECMAScript specification is a standard that JavaScript adheres to, which ensures the code we write will work across any browser. Hopefully, you're now clear on what JavaScript is. Now, the next obvious question is why learn JavaScript? The first reason is that JavaScript, alongside HTML and CSS, is one of the core technologies of the World Wide Web. Pretty much every website you come across uses JavaScript to handle interactivity and updates, which is not a problem because web browsers have a dedicated JavaScript engine to execute the code on the user's computer. The second reason is that you can also use JavaScript to build server-side applications. In 2009, with the introduction of Node.js, which is a JavaScript runtime environment, JavaScript code can be run outside the browser. This paved way to build servers that can handle network requests, interact with databases, compute logic and return the result, and a lot more. So you can pretty much build full stack applications with JavaScript. But it doesn't stop at that. JavaScript is also used in mobile app development to create cross-platform apps that can run on both iOS and Android, and it is also used to create desktop applications. It is no wonder that JavaScript is the most popular programming language according to the 2021 Stack Overflow Developer Survey. Now, irrespective of whether you'll be using JavaScript on the front end to build web apps, on the back end to build services, on the mobile or desktop to build apps, there are certain features that you must know. They are nothing but the language syntax and concepts. In this crash course, our focus is going to be just that. However, at the end of this course, I will talk about the next steps after you've had a good understanding of the fundamentals. Now then, for some setup. To work with JavaScript, we need three things: a browser, Node.js, and a code editor. Ideally, you either need a browser or Node.js, but I will teach you to use them both. For browser, I'm going to be using Chrome. You can choose to use any browser you already have installed. For Node.js, head over to nodejs.org. You will need to download and install it. Click on LTS, which downloads the installer. Double-click the installer, stick to the defaults, and install Node.js. To write the JavaScript code, I'm going to be using VS Code. Head to code.visualstudio.com, download and install the same. Once you have VS Code installed, in the side panel, open the Extensions panel and make sure to install the Prettier extension. This will help format your code. Finally, open the editor inside a folder of your choice. I have created a folder called JavaScript Crash Course and opened VS Code inside that folder. Here, I'm going to create a new HTML file. Index.html. Type exclamation and tab to generate a simple HTML document. Within the body tag, add an H1 tag that says JavaScript Crash Course. Format the code using Alt-Shift-F, and this pretty much is all the setup we have to do. If you open this index.html file from the File Explorer, you should see the text as expected. Now we are ready to start learning JavaScript. The first thing you need to learn is how to run the JavaScript code you write. We can categorize this into two. Either run the code in the browser or run it in the Node.js runtime. Let's start with the browser. The simplest way to execute JavaScript is in the browser console. Open Chrome and right-click. Click on Inspect, and this brings up the Chrome Developer Tools. Navigate to the console panel. Here you can type in the JavaScript code and it gets executed. The first line of JavaScript you're going to learn is how to make JavaScript output the text "Hello World." It is sort of the convention when you're starting with a new programming language. To output "Hello World," we write a JavaScript statement. Console.log, parentheses, and within parentheses, add quotes and type "Hello World." This is sort of the printf or cout statement if you're used to C or C++. When I press enter, you can see "Hello World" being displayed. So the first way to run JavaScript in the browser is to run it directly in the console. However, this is only suited for short snippets and not when we have to write several lines of code. Which brings us to the second way of running JavaScript. From within an HTML file. Just before the closing body tag, add a pair of script tags. Within these tags, you can add JavaScript code and it will run when the HTML file is loaded in the browser. Let's add console.log quotes "Hello" from script. If I now save the file and open it in the browser, which we already have here, refresh. In the console, we see the text hello from script. Unlike HTML, JavaScript output will always be present in the console. So this is the second way. Of course, it's not always a good idea to mix HTML and JavaScript in the same file. So let's take a look at the third way of running JavaScript in the browser. Similar to external CSS, we can also have external JavaScript. Create a new file called main.js. JS stands for JavaScript. Here we can add JavaScript code. Let's type console.log hello from main.js. Now we need to include this script in the HTML file. For that, we use the script tag again, but we specify the source attribute which will point to the JavaScript file. So script source is going to be equal to main.js. If we now save the file and refresh the HTML page in the browser, we see the newly added text. Hello from what is supposed to be main.js. So an external file linked to the HTML file. These are the three ways to run JavaScript in the browser. But like I mentioned, we can also run JavaScript outside the browser using Node. Let me show you how. In VS Code, click on View and then Terminal. This opens an integrated terminal where we can run some commands. First, let's check if Node.js is installed. Run the command node -- version, and this should output the current version installed on your system. I have 16.13.2. Now run the command node followed by the JavaScript file name, which is main.js. Press enter and you should see the log hello from main.js. This corresponds to our log statement in the file. If you wish to, you can also omit the .js extension. So node followed by main, press enter, and we see the same output. So this is the fourth way to run JavaScript. Now here's the thing. If you were to be learning JavaScript concepts that deal with building web pages with HTML and CSS, the option of using an external script tag in the HTML file is the most suited way to run JavaScript. However, in this crash course, we are learning the programming language aspect of JavaScript, nothing specific to building web pages. For that, using Node.js is what I prefer. We can write the code and run it right here in the terminal and view the output. We can avoid having to visit the browser console every time to see the result. So take a minute, add a few more console log statements in the file, and make yourself familiar with running code in the terminal using Node. Now another syntax which I would like to show before we proceed is how to add comments in JavaScript. If I type 2 forward slashes, that line becomes a comment and is ignored by JavaScript. It is for the user to get some idea about the code. So at the top, I can add 2 forward slashes and write log a statement using console.log. If I now save the file and run the code, node main, you can see the first line doesn't make it into the output. We only see the log statement printing hello from main.js. Alright, now that we know how to run the code we write, it is time to understand the first concept in JavaScript, which is variables. Variables are used to store information. The information can be cost of an item, the name of a user, or any data that might be needed in the code. In JavaScript, in the year 2022, there are two recommended ways to declare variables, using the let and const keywords. Let's look at an example. We use the let keyword followed by the name of the variable. For example, age. To this, we can assign a value. So is equal to 25. So we have stored a value of 25 in a variable called age. We can check this by logging the value to the console. In the next line, console.log, and we pass in age. Make sure there is no quotes around age. Save the file, run node main, and we see 25 in the terminal. Similarly, we can declare variables using the const keyword. So const salary is equal to 80,000, and in the next line, console.log salary. Run node main again, and we see 80,000 being logged. Now you might be wondering, what is the difference between let and const declarations? Well, the difference is that all const declarations must be initialized, and once initialized, you cannot reassign a new value. So if you were to declare const sum without any assignment and run the code node main, we see an error. Missing initializer in const declaration. Also, if we assign a value of 0 or initialize with a value of 0, and then in the next line change salary to 80,000, run the code, we see an error yet again. Type error, assignment to constant variable. However, with let, save the file, comment out salary, run the code, you can see we have no problem. Initialize sum to 0 and reassign a value of 5 in the next line. Log the value to the console, so console.log sum, save the file, run node main, and you can see the value of 5 in the terminal. There are no errors. A good rule of thumb is to always use const declarations unless the variable value is going to change, in which case you can make use of let. So to declare variables in JavaScript, we make use of const and let keywords. Before we proceed, let's comment out the code we have so far so as to not print previous code in the terminal. Alright, the next topic to learn about is data types. Data types basically specify what kind of data can be stored and manipulated within a program. In JavaScript, data types can be categorized into primitive and non-primitive types. As per the latest specification, there are 7 primitive types and 1 non-primitive type. Under primitives, we have string, number, boolean, undefined, null, big int, and symbol. Under non-primitives, we have objects. Let's look at examples for each of them, starting with strings. A string is a sequence of characters that represent a text value. In JavaScript, strings are surrounded by quotes. For example, we can declare a variable const name is equal to, within quotes, Vishwas. Similarly, we can have const language is equal to double quotes JavaScript, and even const channel is equal to codevolution. Now this character is backtick, which is the key below escape key. Now if I format the code, double quotes are converted into single quotes because Prettier is set up to convert double quotes to single quotes on my machine. However, keep in mind, strings can have single quotes, double quotes, or even backticks. Next, we have the number data type that represents integer and floating point numbers. For example, const total is equal to 0 or const pi is equal to 3.14. Next, we have the Boolean data type. A Boolean type represents logical entities and can only have one of two values, true or false. For example, const is primary number is equal to true, or const is new user is equal to false. Booleans are often used to run code conditionally based on the value being true or false. So this is about strings, numbers, and booleans. The next data type is undefined, which represents value that is not assigned. If a variable is declared but the value is not assigned, then the value of that variable will be undefined. For example, let result. If we log the value to the console and run node main, you can see undefined. Of course, you can also set a value of undefined explicitly. So const res is equal to undefined. Make sure you don't add quotes. Now the fifth data type is null, which is a special value that represents empty or unknown value in JavaScript. For example, const data is equal to null. Ideally, null is used to denote a null value and undefined is used to denote a value that is not yet defined. So it is recommended that if you want to explicitly assign a value not known, do not use undefined, but instead use null. So const res should also be equal to null. So that is about undefined and null. The next two values, big int and symbol, we are not going to see examples of them in this beginner's crash course. Big int is a very recent addition and is used to denote an integer value larger than what the number data type can hold. Symbol is a data type introduced in 2015 and denotes a value that is unique and unchangeable. As a beginner, you don't have to worry about these two types. So that is about the 7 primitive types in JavaScript. A primitive value is written as an actual value like the text Vishwas, the number 0, etc. A non-primitive type, on the other hand, is a collection of values. In JavaScript, an object is a complex data type. An object contains properties defined as key value pairs. The syntax is as follows. Variable declaration, so const person, and this is going to be equal to a pair of curly braces. Within the curly braces, we specify properties and values. For example, first name is the property, and the value is Bruce, a string. Last name is the property, and the value is Wayne, which is again a string. We can have another property, age, and set this to 30. The property, also called as key, can only be strings or of the symbol data type. The value, on the other hand, can be any data type. Also, if the key is a valid JavaScript name, for example, it does not contain any hyphens, You can also omit the quotes. And prettier is configured to do so. If I format, you can see we have first name, last name, and age without the quotes. Now to access a property in this object, you can use the dot notation. So in the next line, console.log to print something to the terminal, and let's access the person's first name. It is going to be person, dot notation, followed by first name. If we run the code, node main, you can see Bruce in the terminal. Now this syntax is known as object literal and is one way to store a collection of data. The other way you should be aware of as a beginner is the array type. Arrays are written with square brackets, and the items in an array are separated by commas. For example, const odd numbers is going to be equal to square brackets, and we specify a collection of values separated by commas. So 1, 3, 5, 7, and 9. To access a value in an array, we use the position of the item, which starts at 0 instead of 1. So console.log odd numbers, and the way we access is with square brackets, and we specify the position of the item. Now this starts at 0. So if we log odd numbers of 0 and run node main, we see 1, which is the first element in the array. If I change position to 1, run node main, we see 3. Change it to 2, it will print 5, and so on. As you can see, multiple values are stored in one collection variable called odd numbers and can be accessed based on the position. So these are the different data types in JavaScript. Now what you should know is that JavaScript is a dynamically typed language, which means you don't have to specify the data type of a variable when you declare it, which also means that data types are automatically converted as needed during execution. So you can declare let a is equal to 10, and in the very next line, assign a is equal to Vishwas. And then a is equal to true. So from assigning a number to a string to a Boolean value. If we log a to the console and run node main, we see a value of true. And this is the last assigned value. Because JavaScript is dynamically typed, this type of an assignment does not cause an error message. Alright, now that you know the different data types, the next topic to learn is operators. In JavaScript, an operator is a special symbol used to perform operations on values and variables. Here is a list of operators we will be learning as a beginner. Assignment operators, arithmetic operators, comparison operators, logical operators, string operators, and a few other operators. Let's start with assignment, which is an operator we have already seen in this video. I'm going to begin by selecting all the code we have written so far and pressing Ctrl//, which will comment out the code. Now let's focus on the assignment operator. The assignment operator is used to assign values to variables. For example, let x is equal to 10. This is the assignment operator. Next, we have the arithmetic operators, which are used to perform arithmetic calculations. For example, if we have two variables, x is equal to 10 and let y is equal to 5, we can console.log x plus y. If we run node main, we see the result 15. Similarly, x minus y will give us 5. X star y, which is x multiplied by y, will give us 50. X divided by y will give us 2. And x modulus y, which gives you the remainder after dividing 10 by 5, will log 0 to the terminal. Now you can also have plus plus x, which increments x by 1. Say console.log plus plus x, node main, and you can see the value is 11. And similarly, minus minus y, which decrements y value by 1. So node main, and you can see the value is 4. Now here, x and y are referred to as operands, and the symbol, of course, is the operator. So these are some of the arithmetic operations you can perform in JavaScript. Next, we have the comparison operators. Comparison operators compare two values and return a Boolean value, either true or false. First, we have x double equals y, which checks if x and y are equal. So node main, and we see false. We have x not equal to y, and this will return true. We also have x triple equals y, which compares not just the value, but also the data type. And if we run node main, you can see it returns false as well. Similarly, we have x strictly not equal to y, which returns true. We will learn about this special equality in JavaScript in just a bit. We then have x greater than y, which is true, x greater than or equal to y, which is again true, and similarly y less than x, which is true, and y lesser than or equal to x, which is again true. Comparison operators are primarily used in loops and branching statements, which we will learn about later on in this video. Next, we move on to logical operators in JavaScript. Logical operators perform logical operations, no surprise there, and return either true or false. They are very helpful when combining comparison operators' results to make a decision. For example, let's say we need to figure out if the number 8 lies in the range of x and y. So we can write const is valid number, and this is going to be equal to x greater than 8 ampersand ampersand 8 greater than y. Here, double ampersand is called logical AND operator. It returns true only if both operands evaluate to true. If not, it returns false. Now x is 11, which is greater than 8, and y is 4, which is less than 8. So if you were to log is valid number to the console, run node main, you can see it evaluates to true. So it is a valid number. Similar to logical AND, we have logical OR operator denoted by double pipe character. This will return true if either of the operands is true. Else it will return false. So if I change x greater than 20, which is false, but y is still less than 8, run node main, we see is valid number is still true. So if either of the two operands is true, The logical OR operator returns true. Finally, we have the logical NOT operator, which negates the value. For example, if we have const isValid is equal to true, not of isValid is going to return false. So if we run node main, you can see the last value is false. Change true to false, run node main once more, and now it returns true. Next, let's move on to the string operators. In JavaScript, we can use the plus operator to join two or more strings. So if we type console.log the string Bruce plus the string Wayne with the space at the end of Bruce, run node main, we see Bruce Wayne as a single string in the terminal. So the plus operator performs addition when used with numbers and concatenation when used with strings. As beginners, it is very important to keep this in mind as we tend to create bugs because of this behavior. And I will elaborate on that in a few minutes. Now there are a few more operators, but I want to discuss just one more, which is the ternary operator. The ternary operator returns a value based on the condition. Let me explain with an example. Let's define const isEven, and this is going to be equal to 10 modulus 2, and if this is equal to 0, question mark true, colon false. What happens here is that the condition is evaluated first. Is the remainder of dividing 10 by 2 equal to 0? If it is, assign true to isEven. If the condition is not true, assign false to isEven. So if I log isEven, run node main, you can see the value is true. And of course, you can assign any value you want to. I can say number is even, else number is odd. Run node main, and you can see number is even is printed in the terminal. So based on the condition, assign a value to the variable. The ternary operator is used quite often, so make sure you've understood how it works. Now that we have a good understanding of types and operators in JavaScript, the next topic to learn is type conversion. We will learn how to convert one type to another because a lot of the times the code you write has to do some kind of conversion. In JavaScript, there are two kinds of type conversions. Implicit conversion, also known as type coercion, where JavaScript itself will automatically convert the type to be able to run the code you have written. And we also have explicit conversion, where you manually convert the type. Let's look at examples of both these conversions. Let's start with implicit conversion. Now the first conversion is if you try to add with a numeric string type, JavaScript converts the operand to a string before concatenation. So if we type console.log number 2 plus a numeric string 3, run node main, you can see the result is 23. So if you try to add with a numeric string type, the result is a string after concatenation. Similarly, if we add true plus numeric string 3, we get the result true 3, which is a concatenation of the two operands. On the other hand, if you use a numeric string with subtraction, multiplication, or division, the numeric string is automatically converted into a number. So if we console log numeric string 4 minus numeric string 2, run node main, you can see the result is the number 2. JavaScript converts both 4 and 2 to numbers and then performs subtraction. Now I would like you to pause the video and try the same with multiplication and division. Now what is worth noting though is if you try to use non-numeric strings, the result is a special value called not a number. So if we console log Bruce minus Wayne, run node main, it will result in NaN, which is not a number. Now if we were to use Boolean values with numeric strings, false is treated as 0 and true as 1. So console log numeric string 5 minus true will result in 4, and numeric string 5 minus false will result in 5. Also, if you use null with subtraction, null is treated as 0. So console.log numeric string 5 minus null will give back 5. The final example under implicit conversion is that of undefined. If you use undefined with number, boolean or null, the result is not a number. For example, console log the number 5 plus undefined, run node main, you can see the result is not a number. As you can see, JavaScript automatically converts types when performing operations, and it is crucial you understand this coercion to avoid any confusion in your code. It might take some time, but at least you're aware of the concept to come back and refer to. Next, let's move on to examples on explicit type conversion. For manual conversion, we're going to rely on some of the built-in methods available in JavaScript. First, to convert a string or boolean to numeric types, you can use the number global method. So console log number with n uppercase, parentheses, and we pass in a numeric string 5. If you run node main, you can see it returns the number 5. If you pass a boolean value, let's say false, it will return 0. An empty string will also return 0. Apart from number, you can also use parseInt method. So parseInt numeric string 5 node main, and this will return 5. If you want a floating point number, you can make use of parseFloat. So parseFloat within quotes 3.14. Run node main, and we get back a floating point number 3.14. Next, we have the string global method to convert other data types to string. For example, console log string parentheses, and we pass in a number 500. Node main, and this will print 500 as a string. Similarly, true will return the string true. Null will return the string null, and undefined will return the string undefined. As an alternative to the string global method, you can also use the toString method. For example, console log the number 500 dot toString. This has to be in parentheses. Run node main, and it logs the string 500 in the terminal. toString, however, will not work on null and undefined. Finally, to convert other data types to Boolean, you can use the global Boolean method. For example, console log Boolean of the number 10 will return true. Let me spell this right. Node main, and you can see the value is true. And it is worth noting that null, undefined, a numeric 0, empty string, and not a number all return false when converted to Boolean. Everything else will return true. As a quick assignment, I want you to run Boolean method on these values and find out the return value, including a string that has only spaces as its value. Alright, I hope you now have an idea of how to convert between types in JavaScript. With an understanding of how to convert between the different data types, the next topic to learn about is equality. And this is a slightly confusing topic to wrap your head around as a beginner. JavaScript is, let's say, a bit weird when it comes to equality. We have two types. Double equals, which allows coercion when the types are different, and triple equals, which does not allow coercion. Let's understand both with a few examples. Back in VS Code, let's declare a few constants. Const variable 1 is equal to the string test, and const variable 2 is equal to, again, the string test. Let's now log both equalities. So console log variable 1 double equals variable 2, make a copy of it, and this time variable 1 triple equals variable 2. If we run the code, node main, both return true. When the types are the same, there is no confusion. However, if I now change variable 1 to a number 10 and variable 2 to the numeric string 10, run node main, you can see double equals is true, whereas triple equals is false. In case of double equals, JavaScript coerces the values to the same type. So string 10 is converted into numeric 10 automatically and then compared. Both constants would be of the same value, and hence the result is true. However, triple equals is more strict and ensures both constants must be of the same type and will not convert implicitly. Since a number is different from a string type, false is returned. Now, it's not wrong to use double equals, but as a beginner, it is probably safe to use triple equals to check equality. And this is simply because there is quite a bit of strange coercion that JavaScript does. For example, if variable 1 is equal to 0 and variable 2 is equal to an empty string, run node main, you can see that double equals still returns true. Similarly, false and empty string, double equals is once again true. Null and undefined, well, it is true again. All the values we have just seen are treated as falsy values in JavaScript, and double equals will treat them as equals, which, as you can see, may be confusing and lead to incorrect results. So although it isn't wrong to use double equals, my advice would be to use triple equals when writing code as a beginner. Now, this concept of equality is very important, which leads us to the next topic in this video, and that is about conditional statements. Conditional statements are used to perform different actions based on different conditions. For example, you may want to execute different blocks of code based on whether a number is positive, negative, or 0. In JavaScript, we have the following conditional statements: if, else, else if, and switch. Let's first look at if, else, and else if statements, and then look at switch, which is an alternative. Back in VS Code, let's declare a constant. Const num is equal to 5. Now what we want to do is log a statement to the terminal if the number is a positive number. For such a scenario, we can use the if statement. The syntax is as follows: if followed by parentheses. Within parentheses, we specify a condition. Our condition is that num should be greater than 0. Then we specify a pair of curly braces. Within the curly braces, we write the code that will be executed only if this condition evaluates to true. Let's add console log number is positive. If we now run the code, node main in the terminal, we see number is positive. If we change num to -5, rerun, we see that the statement is not logged in the terminal. So the if statement evaluates the condition inside the parentheses, and if the condition evaluates to true, it runs the code within the curly braces. Sometimes you may want to run a different block of code if the condition evaluates to false. In such a case, you can make use of the else statement. Now the else statement must follow an if statement. So we can add else and then curly braces once again. Within curly braces, we can type console log number is not positive. If we now rerun the code, we see the log statement as expected. Number is not positive as it is -5. So if the condition evaluates to true, if block is executed, and if the condition is false, the else block is executed. Now if you have just 2 alternate blocks of code to run, the if-else statements are sufficient. However, if you need to decide amongst more than 2 alternatives, you need the if, else if, and else statements. For example, instead of just logging whether the number is positive or not, let's try to log if the number is positive, negative, or 0. Let me explain the syntax. The if block remains the same, so let's leave it as it is and remove the else block. So if num is greater than 0, we log number is positive. But after the if block, we now use the else if block. So else if, and this again follows an if block. This statement allows us to specify a new condition. So parentheses, and we're going to specify if num is less than 0, and we add another code block which will be executed if that condition is true. So the first condition might be false, but the second condition might be true. In this case, let's log to the console, number is negative. Finally, if both these conditions are false, we want to log that the number is 0. For that, we make use of the else statement as there is no other condition to evaluate. So else console log number is 0. If we now rerun the code, we see the statement number is negative. Change num to 0, node main, we can see number is 0. Our code works as expected. Now what you should know is that you're allowed to specify as many number of else if statements as you wish to. It is not restricted to just one additional condition. Now if-else statements do a good job of enabling conditional code. They're good when you have a few alternatives and each have a good chunk of code to be executed. However, if you have a large number of choices with little code to execute in each choice, a switch statement is better suited. For our example, let's check a color and log that color value to the console. I'm going to declare a new variable or constant called color, and let's set this to red. Now, for our switch statement, the syntax is the keyword switch followed by parentheses. Within parentheses, we specify a value or an expression. In our case, it is going to be the constant color. Now, this is followed by curly braces. Within curly braces, we can specify one or more cases, and that we specify using the case keyword. To check if color can be red, we specify case followed by the string red. And if this is true, we log color is red. After the log statement though, we need to specify the break keyword, and this will prevent the next case from being executed. Now let's compare with two more colors. So red, case blue, in which case color is blue is logged to the console. And finally, green, in which case color is green is logged to the console. If we run node main, you can see color is red. Change this to blue, you can see color is blue. Now it's also possible that the user might specify a completely different value. For example, color is 10. In this case, none of the case statements are executed and there's no text logged in the terminal. To handle this, you can add the default switch statement. So default case, where we are going to log not a valid color to the console. Node main, and you can see we have the text not a valid color. So the switch statements evaluates the expression within parentheses and executes the code corresponding to the matching case. If there is no matching case, the default case is executed. So switch statements and if-else statements. These are some of the ways you can conditionally run code in JavaScript. Let's now move on to the next topic, which is looping code in JavaScript. In programming, loops are used to repeat a block of code. For example, if you want to print numbers from 1 to 50, you can make use of a loop. Of course, that's a very simple example, but you can achieve a lot with loops. They're used in almost every app that you develop and are really important from a beginner's point of view. In this crash course, we're going to take a look at 4 looping constructs: for loop, while loop, do while loop, and for off loop. Let's understand the syntax and usage with an example. First up, for loop. The syntax is as follows. We have the keyword for followed by parentheses. Inside the parentheses, we have 3 items separated by semicolons. First is the initializer, which is run before starting the loop. Second is the condition, which is checked to see if the loop should stop. Third, the final expression, which is run each time the loop has gone through an iteration. We then have a pair of curly braces that contains a block of code which will run each time the loop iterates. Let's understand this better by writing some code. For our example, let's log a message to the terminal 5 times. Back in VS Code, start with the for keyword followed by parentheses. For the initializer, we're going to initialize a variable called I and set it to 1. So let I is equal to 1. For the condition, since we are logging a message 5 times, we specify I less than or equal to 5. For the final expression, we increment the value of I by 1. So I plus plus. You might remember this from the operators section. Now for the block of code, we're going to run console log iteration number, and we concatenate it with the value of variable I. If we save the file and run the code, we see the message logged 5 times. The value of I increments from 1 to 5. Let me slowly walk you through the execution of this for loop. First, I is set to a value of 1. Next, the loop checks if I is less than or equal to 5. It is. The code inside the curly braces is executed. After that, I is incremented by 1. Now the condition is checked again. This time, I is equal to 2. Condition is still valid since 2 is less than 5. The message is logged and I is incremented once again. This happens for I is equal to 3, 4, and 5. But after logging the 5th message, I is incremented to 6. Now the condition evaluates to false since 6 is not less than or equal to 5. When the condition becomes false, this loop is terminated. This is how the for loop works. We are able to repeat execution of code, in our case the log statement, 5 times without having to type it out 5 times. Let's now proceed with the second looping construct, which is the while loop. Here is the syntax. The parts of a while loop are similar to that of a for loop, as you can see. However, there is a bit of rearrangement. The initializer variable is set before the loop, and the final expression is included inside the loop after the code to run. Let's head back to VS Code and rewrite the for loop logic with while loop. Let's first comment out the for loop. Now, the first part is the initializer. So let I is equal to 1. Then the while loop. The keyword while, followed by parentheses and then curly braces. Within parentheses, we specify the condition. The condition is I should be less than or equal to 5. In the code block, we specify the log message. So console.log iteration number concatenated with the value of I. But now, right before the closing brace, we specify the final expression, which is incrementing the value of I by 1. So I plus plus. Run the code, node main, and we see the same output. The execution is also similar to the for loop. First I is set to 1. The condition is then evaluated, which is true. The code is executed and I is incremented. This continues till the value of I is 6, in which case the condition evaluates to false and the loop is terminated. Pretty straightforward if you have understood the for loop. Now a variation of the while loop is the do while loop. The syntax is as follows. The main difference is that the do while loop is always executed at least once. That is because the condition comes after the code inside the loop. Let's head back to VS Code and rewrite the logic with do while. Comment out the while loop. Now we start with the initializer, which remains the same. Let I is equal to 1. Next, we add the do keyword followed by the code block. Copy paste from the while loop. Console log and increment the value of I. After the closing curly brace, specify the condition. So while I is less than or equal to 5. If we now run the code, node main, we see the same output, iteration number 1 through 5. However, if we initialize I is equal to 6 and run the code, we still see the log statement once, iteration number 6. This was not the case with just the while loop. So do while executes the code block once and then evaluates the condition. Since 6 is greater than 5, the loop is terminated after logging the message once. Let's now move on to the fourth looping construct, which is the for/of loop. This was introduced recently and is mainly used to loop over a collection of data like an array, for example. Here is the syntax. The for keyword followed by parentheses. Within parentheses, we get hold of each item in the collection in each iteration. And then we have the code block within curly braces. Let's look at an example. Back in VS Code, I'm going to comment out the do while loop and create an array of 5 numbers. So const num array is going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Now for the for/of loop, we can write for const num of num array, curly braces, console log, iteration number, plus num. If we run the code, node main, we have the same output as before. What happens here is that the for/of loop automatically iterates over the array and in each iteration assigns the value of the array element to num. We can then execute the necessary code using that element. So in iteration 1, num is equal to 1. In iteration 2, num is equal to 2, and so on till the 5th iteration. The for/of loop is best suited for a collection of data as it abstracts away 2 things. First, you don't have to keep track of a variable to increment the iteration count. So there is no need to track a variable like I, which we have done previously. Second, you don't have to figure out how to access the item in the collection. For example, array of 0, array of 1, array of 2, etc. The for/of loop does it all, and you just have to worry about the code that needs to be run. So these are the 4 looping constructs that you as a beginner should be aware of. Again, you don't have to memorize these things. You just have to know they exist and where to come back to when you do come across the need to use them in your code. Alright, for the penultimate topic in this crash course, let's learn about functions. Functions are one of the fundamental building blocks in JavaScript. A JavaScript function is a block of code designed to perform a particular task. For example, add 2 numbers, multiply 2 numbers, etc. Functions are reusable as they can be defined once and can be called with different values, resulting in different results. Functions also help divide a complex problem into smaller chunks and make your program easy to understand and maintain. Let's take a look at the syntax of a function. As you can see, a function is defined with the function keyword followed by the name of the function. That is followed by parentheses. The parentheses may include parameter names separated by commas. It is completely optional. We then have a pair of curly braces, and within the curly braces, the code to be executed. Let's head back to VS Code and understand with a few examples. For our first example, let's define a function which logs a greeting message to the console. So first, the function keyword followed by the function name. Let's call it greet. This is followed by parentheses and then curly braces. Within curly braces, the code to execute. We're going to add a simple log statement. good morning, Vishwas. So we have defined our function. But a function doesn't run by itself. We have to call or invoke that function. We do that by specifying the function name followed by parentheses. If we now run the code, node main, we see the greeting message in the terminal. Our first function is working as expected. Now we can call the function any number of times and we will see the same message. So if I invoke the function 2 more times, run the code, we see the message 3 times in the terminal. Now this is fine, but what would be better is if the person's name is dynamic. That way we can use the same good morning message but with different names and greet multiple people. This is where parameters come into play. A parameter is like an input to the function. Let's call it username. Now, in the log statement, we can use concatenation. So good morning string plus username. Now, when we invoke the function, we need to pass in the username. Let's pass the string Bruce, Clark, and Diana. If we run the code, we can see that we can greet 3 different people using the same function. Now in the function definition, this input username is called a parameter. When invoking the function, Bruce, Clark, and Diana are called function arguments. Function parameter, function argument. Good to have the terminology in mind. Now a function can also return a value which we can use later in our code. Let me show you an example. Let's define a function that adds 2 numbers and returns their sum. So function followed by function name, which will be add. We then have parentheses, and this will have 2 parameters, a, comma, b. Within the function body, return a plus b. Now here, a and b are 2 input parameters. Within function body, we add the 2 parameters, so a plus b, and return the sum from this function. Return is a JavaScript keyword which will return the value from the add function when we invoke it. So what this allows us to do is assign the result to a constant. Const sum is equal to add 5, 10. We don't have any complex logic, so let's simply log the sum to the console in the next line. Console.log sum. If we run the code, we see 15 in the terminal. Change to 25 and 25. Run the code and we see 50. So the 2 numbers are added together and returned. As you can see, functions are very useful. Define the code once and use it as many times as you want to. Pass in different arguments to produce different results. It also helps organize code into smaller, maintainable code blocks. Now in 2015, an alternate syntax was introduced to define functions. They are called arrow functions and offer a more concise way of writing functions. Let's rewrite the add function using arrow functions. Const arrow sum is going to be the function name, and this is going to be equal to an arrow function. The syntax is parentheses followed by equal to and greater than sign, which is called a fat arrow, and then the function body. This function is going to have 2 input parameters and return their summation. Return a plus b. We can now replace add with arrow sum. run node main, and we see the same output. But with arrow functions, we do have a more concise syntax, as I mentioned. Now, if you just have one statement that is returned, which is the case with our arrow sum function, you can omit the curly braces and the return keyword. So remove the curly braces and the return keyword. You can inline a plus b on the same function line. Run the code again, and we still see 50. Another point worth noting is that if you just have one argument, you can, if you want to, omit the parentheses around the argument. For example, const add 5 will accept one parameter, which is called num, and will return num plus 5. Now when I format the code, it automatically adds the parentheses, but this is still valid. Arrow functions are used in a lot of code bases, and I wanted to ensure you know the syntax. Now I cannot stress enough how important functions are in any programming language, so make sure you learn them well. Alright, for the final topic in this crash course, we're going to learn about scope in JavaScript. Scope basically determines the accessibility or visibility of variables. JavaScript has three types of scope: block scope, function scope, and global scope. Let's understand each of them with an example, starting with block scope. Block scope was introduced in 2015 with the introduction of let and const keywords. Basically, block scope dictates that variables declared inside a pair of curly braces cannot be accessed from outside the block. So if you were to have if block, so if true, const my name is equal to Vishwas, and try to access the name outside the block, so console.log my name, run the code, you can see JavaScript throws an error. Reference error, my name is not defined. If you move the log statement inside the if block though, run the code again, we see Vishwas logged in the terminal. So let and const declared variables can only be accessed inside the block they're declared in. Next, we have function scope, which dictates that variables declared inside a function are not accessible from outside the function. So if we define a function test function, and type const my name is equal to Batman, and log the value outside the function, JavaScript throws an error. Again, reference error, my name is not defined. If you move the log statement within the function, run the code, call test function, and run the code, you can see Batman logged in the terminal. What is also worth noting here is that both my name variables have different scope. My name within the if block is Vishwas, whereas within test function is Batman, even though they have the same variable name. Very important to keep that in mind. The final scope is global scope, which is the scope outside any block or a function. A global scoped variable is accessible both inside a block as well as a function. Let me show you an example. Above the if block and the function, I'm going to define a constant called mynum and set it to 100. Let's log the value in the if block as well as the function. So console log mynum, and the same within the function. If we run the code, you can see 100 twice. So we are able to access a globally scoped variable inside a block as well as a function. Also, if we declare a constant called my name again and set it to Superman, run the code, we still see Vishwas and Batman, but not Superman. So a globally declared variable will not overwrite block or function scoped variables. As you can see, scope is a really important concept to be aware of, as you need to understand how variable values are resolved by JavaScript. Well, with that, we come to the end of this crash course on the fundamentals of JavaScript. If you've enjoyed the video, please do leave a like and subscribe to the channel for more content on web development. I'll see you in the next video, which is a crash course on the advanced topics in JavaScript.